911. What's going on out there?
Somebody somebody started burning up. Her, this lady on fire right now.
Do what?
She burnt all up. You gotta
She's
plan.
burnt?
She burnt. Somebody probably set the car on fire or something. I don't know. She just come out of the woods to my house.
This is the haunting story of Audreanna Zimmerman, a bright 19-year-old from Pensacola, Florida, whose life took a tragic turn on March the 24th, 2010. But before we get into Audreanna Zimmerman's case, there is something you need to know about Tina LaSonia Brown.
What did she do that was so awful that she would die a torturous death like this? That's what we want to know.
I have nothing to do with nothing. That's my friend. I'm telling you, that's my friend. I would never hurt her.
Tina, born Tina Coleman in 1970, grew up in a home filled with instability. Her parents, Lily and Willie Coleman, were young and unprepared for the responsibility of raising kids. Tina and her younger brother, Willie Jr., were often left alone or sent to relatives' homes. At just 12 years old, Tina was forced to care for her brother, cook meals, and help him with school. But was it fair to ask a child to raise another? Things only got worse for Tina. Her father, involved in gangs and drugs, became abusive, even attacking her mother. This caused Lily to leave, but she left Tina and her brother in the care of their father, where the abuse continued. When she tried to escape to her grandmother's house, she was rejected. Eventually, Tina found herself in a chaotic home with her father's new wife, who further exploited and mistreated her. As Tina grew older, her life was filled with trauma, addiction, and instability. After a troubled relationship and struggle with drugs, Tina moved to Pensacola, Florida, hoping to rebuild her life. Despite her efforts, she couldn't escape the past. It was during this time that Tina formed a close bond with her neighbors, 27-year-old Heather Lee and 19-year-old Audreanna Zimmerman. Now let's shift our focus to Audreanna Zimmerman and how her life at a mobile home park in Pensacola, Escambia County, shaped her circumstances. Born on April 13, 1990, Audreanna was just 19 years old at the time of her untimely death. She was a young mother raising two small children, 3-year-old David and 2-year-old Trinity. Her life, though filled with love for her kids, was anything but easy. As a single mother, Audreanna faced immense financial struggles. Raising two children on her own required resources she simply didn't have. Partners had proven unreliable, and with no immediate family to lean on, she sought support wherever she could find it. Life in a mobile home park brought her close to her neighbors, forming bonds that offered her some solace in an otherwise challenging world. Her nearest neighbors, 39-year-old Tina Brown, Tina's 16-year-old daughter Brittany Miller, and Heather Lee, a 27-year-old, became a part of Audreanna's small social circle. For a young mother trying to keep her head above water, having this network must have seemed like a lifeline. But were these relationships truly as supportive as they appeared? Mobile home parks often become a haven for people navigating instability, whether financial, social, or personal. However, such environments can also foster tensions, as close proximity can magnify disagreements. In this particular park, volatile relationships were common, with minor disputes spiraling into heated arguments and sometimes physical altercations. At first, it seemed like Audreanna had found a way to navigate the difficulties of single motherhood by relying on her neighbors. These were the people who were supposed to help her through tough times. But as time passed, tensions began to rise. For Audreanna and her neighbors, disagreements were frequent. Arguments over personal matters, accusations of betrayal, and even police interventions became part of their interactions. But what could have triggered such a shift in their relationships? Why did their friendship, or what seemed to be a friendship, suddenly become a battleground? The truth is, living so close to one another in such a confined space breeds familiarity. And with that familiarity comes the possibility of both strong bonds and explosive disagreements. Minor squabbles escalated into physical altercations, and in an environment where stability is hard to come by, it's easy to see how things can spiral out of control. One of the main issues between Audreanna and Tina stemmed from a very serious accusation. Audreanna believed that Tina had reported her to the Florida Department of Children and Families, claiming that Audreanna wasn't taking proper care of her children. For any mother, this would have been devastating. And for Audreanna, it felt like a betrayal from someone she thought she could trust. How would you feel if someone you considered a friend put your family at risk? Would you confront them or try to walk away? Imagine the fear of losing your children, of having authorities question your ability to care for them. How could a situation like this not destabilize everything she had worked so hard for? But it didn't end there. Audreanna also accused Tina of having her boyfriend arrested, further fueling the conflict between them. How do you rebuild trust when someone you believe is a friend has essentially betrayed you? Could this betrayal, real or perceived, have led to such an explosive situation? On top of that, Audreanna accused Tina of damaging her property, claiming that Tina had broken her car window. Tina, on the other hand, alleged that Audreanna had slashed her car tires. Was this the final straw that broke the camel's back, or was there more simmering under the surface? In any case, the tension between them was undeniable. It seemed like each small dispute only added fuel to the fire. Could any of this have been avoided if they had simply resolved their differences? Or was the damage already done by the time these arguments turned violent? The environment they lived in didn't help. When financial hardships and unstable personal histories collide, it creates a pressure cooker effect where even minor disputes can escalate. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happened in this case. The relationships between Audreanna, Tina, Brittany, and Heather were anything but stable. It's important to note that these neighbors had not known each other for very long. There wasn't a foundation of trust or a history of positive interactions to fall back on when conflicts arose. Instead, their relationships were fragile from the start, and grievances piled up quickly. Without a strong bond to hold them together, resentment took root, and their arguments became increasingly intense. Arguments that began as petty squabbles often turned physical, leading to interventions by the police. This pattern revealed not just a lack of control over their behavior, but also a deep-seated dysfunction in their interactions. Their arguments, often revolving around men and personal betrayals, seemed to consume their interactions entirely. But why were they unable to resolve their conflicts peacefully? Was it the absence of trust, or something darker that lingered beneath the surface? As tensions escalated, it became clear that this group of neighbors was trapped in a cycle of mistrust and hostility. Their volatile relationships were a ticking time bomb, with each new argument adding fuel to the fire. Audreanna's situation was further complicated by her vulnerability as a young mother trying to navigate life on her own. She relied on her neighbors for support, but the very people she turned to for help became sources of stress and fear. Now, can you guess what the most recent disagreement between Audreanna Zimmerman and Brittany Miller was? Well, it revolved around something deeply personal: Brittany's boyfriend. At just 16 years old, Brittany had reportedly discovered that Audreanna, who was 19 at the time, had allegedly been involved with her boyfriend. Whether true or not, such a revelation would understandably upset anyone, let alone a teenager still learning to navigate the intensity of emotions and relationships. This discovery sparked a confrontation. Brittany, enraged, tried to punch Audreanna, but things escalated quickly. In response to the attack, Audreanna used a stun gun, a high-level and extreme reaction to defend herself. The presence of a stun gun in their environment alone suggested deeper dysfunction within their community, and this moment revealed just how volatile things had become. After the incident, Brittany's mother, Tina Brown, learned about the altercation. Hearing that her daughter had been tasered enraged her. It's natural for any parent to be furious when their child is harmed, but instead of taking the situation to the authorities, Tina decided to handle it herself, a choice that would lead to unimaginable consequences. The dynamics within this group were already strained. Heather, another individual close to the family, would later reveal that violence and arguments were nothing new between Audreanna and Brittany. She had reportedly intervened in multiple fights between the two, highlighting how toxic their interactions had become.
Do you know the lady lives in lot 3 back there?
Tina, yes, I know Tina. All of us know each other out here. I met her when she first moved out
Okay,
here.
how long has she been here?
I'm not quite sure. It's been a couple months, so she ain't been living out here no longer than a year.
Okay,
She
where
been
did you
here
where
for
did you go tonight before we got here?
Tonight?
Tonight? Yeah.
I didn't go anywhere.
Despite the recurring conflicts, Audreanna and Brittany remained intertwined in each other's lives, with a mix of shared history and unresolved tension fueling the chaos. On March 24, 2010, Tina reached out to Audreanna, extending what seemed to be an olive branch. She invited Audreanna to her trailer, claiming she wanted to repair their friendship and put the past behind them. For Audreanna, this was likely a welcome chance to move forward. Living in a hostile environment where violence loomed was exhausting, and the idea of making peace must have seemed like a glimmer of hope. Unbeknownst to Audreanna, the invitation was a trap. Inside the trailer, Tina, Brittany, Heather, and another girl, Mallory, who was only 13 years old, had already devised a sinister plan. Before Audreanna arrived, Heather had explained how to use a stun gun effectively. Brittany had even told Mallory that they were fixing to kill Audreanna, a chilling admission of premeditation. Despite any perceived faults or actions on Audreanna's part, nothing could justify what was about to unfold. The group had deliberated, planned, and ultimately chosen to carry out a violent act. For Audreanna, walking into that trailer was an act of hope and reconciliation. For the others, it was a calculated move to end her life. This tragic turn of events highlights how quickly emotions can spiral into irreparable harm, especially when fueled by anger, revenge, and a lack of accountability. Tina had even hidden a stun gun in a cabinet, signaling just how premeditated their plan was. Brittany had made it clear to Mallory, if she revealed what was about to happen, she would face the same fate. The stage was set for something unimaginable. Audreanna arrived around 9 p.m., completely unaware of the danger. Within minutes, the horrifying reality unfolded. Tina used the stun gun on Audreanna, shocking her repeatedly. The pain, fear, and helplessness must have been overwhelming. Imagine the surge of electricity, the paralyzing effect on her body, and the realization that she was outnumbered, unable to fight back. What would you do if you were in her place? How do you fight back when your body is incapacitated and your attackers show no mercy? As Audreanna screamed, begging for help, Tina dragged her into the bathroom. Brittany punched her in the face, adding to her agony. To silence her cries, Heather shoved a sock into her mouth. It wasn't just physical pain. It was psychological torment. Every second was a new layer of horror. But the nightmare didn't end there. The group forced Audreanna into the trunk of Tina's car. Can you imagine the horror of being locked in a confined, dark space, knowing you're being taken somewhere far worse? For Audreanna, a young mother, the fear wasn't just for herself, but also for the children she might never see again. The claustrophobia, the darkness, and the uncertainty would have been unbearable. They drove her to a secluded wooded area. It was dark, silent, and eerie, a place chosen to hide the unspeakable acts they planned. As they opened the trunk, Audreanna tried to run. It was a desperate, instinctive act of survival, but the odds were against her. The rough terrain, the darkness, and her weakened state caused her to trip. The attackers caught her again, dragging her back into their grasp. What followed was brutal beyond comprehension. Tina and Brittany took turns attacking Audreanna. Tina wielded the stun gun while Brittany used a crowbar, each inflicting unimaginable pain. The weapons were deadly, and the intent was clear. They wanted to cause as much pain as possible. Then, as if this wasn't enough, they switched weapons, taking turns to ensure they both played equal roles in her suffering. This wasn't just violence. It was sadistic enjoyment. Brittany didn't stop at the weapons. She used her fists, punching Audreanna repeatedly. It was personal for her. She seemed to relish the physical connection, as if each blow was fueled by twisted satisfaction. By now, Audreanna was severely injured, lying helpless on the ground. But Tina and Brittany weren't done. Tina walked to her car and retrieved a can of gasoline. She poured it over Audreanna's battered body. Then, with a lighter in hand, she set her on fire. What kind of person can set another human being on fire? How can anyone ignore the screams of pain and terror? Audreanna screamed as flames engulfed her, the pain unimaginable. Brittany, instead of showing any remorse, reportedly jumped up and down, shouting, "Burn! Burn!" The attackers watched as the young woman writhed in agony, their actions devoid of humanity. Astonishingly, Audreanna was still conscious when they set her alight. Face down on the ground, she fought through the pain, her survival instincts kicking in. Despite her injuries, she managed to roll and extinguish the flames enough to crawl to a nearby home for help. Her attackers, meanwhile, fled the scene. On their way back, Brittany realized she had left behind some critical items, including the stun gun and her shoes. Tina, however, refused to turn back. She wanted to put as much distance as possible between them and the crime scene. Back at the trailer, the attackers likely thought they had gotten away with it. Their lack of planning, their disregard for consequences, and their inhumanity revealed a disorganized and reckless mindset. Perhaps they believed no one would care about what happened to Audreanna, that her life was insignificant. But they were wrong. Now, miraculously, despite enduring life-threatening injuries, Audreanna Zimmerman managed to summon the strength to walk nearly a third of a mile. Her destination was a nearby house belonging to a man named Terrence Hendrick. In the quiet darkness of that night, Terrence initially heard faint cries for help, so soft he wasn't sure they were real. Curiosity pushed him to investigate, and it wasn't long before he spotted a figure, moving slowly, painfully, towards his home. As Audreanna came closer, it became horrifyingly clear that she was gravely injured. Terrence immediately called for help, staying with her on his porch until emergency responders arrived.
911, what's going on out there?
Somebody started burning up. Her, this lady on fire right now.
Do what?
She burnt all up. You gotta see She burnt. Somebody probably set the car on fire or something. I don't know. She just come out of the woods to my house.
She sat on the steps, rocking back and forth in an attempt to comfort herself. A natural response in times of overwhelming pain and fear. This small movement, though, revealed the sheer magnitude of her suffering. Her body was severely burned, her skin blackened, and she reeked of gasoline. Terrence later recalled thinking she might be naked, but he couldn't tell where her burned skin ended and the remnants of her clothing began. When emergency medical technicians arrived, they were shocked at the extent of her injuries. Her burns were so severe that her skin was peeling away at the slightest touch. The EMTs worked as best they could, treating her burns with gauze and oxygen, but her wounds were so extensive that they quickly ran out of supplies. They also noticed her arms stretched out in front of her, a heartbreaking detail suggesting she couldn't let her arms touch her body because of the unbearable pain. Yet despite everything, Audreanna displayed an unthinkable resilience. Through unimaginable agony, she spoke. She told the EMTs exactly what had happened, how she'd been tasered, beaten with a crowbar, set on fire, and left for dead. She named every attacker and even provided their addresses, but the most devastating detail? She called them her friends. Despite their monstrous betrayal, she referred to them as people she once trusted. It's clear she believed in reconciliation, that broken friendships could be repaired. That belief, tragically, led her into their trap. Audreanna also gave her own address and begged the EMTs to protect her two young children, Trinity and David. Even in her final hours, she prioritized their safety over her own suffering. She was rushed to Sacred Heart Hospital, where doctors placed her in a medically induced coma. It wasn't just her resilience that stood out, it was her unwavering courage and selflessness. Investigators arrived quickly, determined to uncover the full extent of this heinous crime. But Audreanna had already done the most remarkable thing. She had ensured justice would follow. The officers started their search from Terrence's house, where Audreanna had sought help after escaping her attackers. They followed a dirt path leading to a wooded area. As they walked, it didn't take long for them to discover signs of a brutal crime. In the clearing, they found disturbing evidence. A pair of white shoes, a strand of hair, and a crowbar were scattered around the area. There was also a pool of blood, a piece of paper soaked in red stains, and remnants of burnt clothing. Among the debris, they discovered a burnt bra, likely belonging to Audreanna. It was clear to the investigators that this area held crucial evidence. Each of these items was a vital clue, painting a gruesome picture of what had happened. The investigation was moving fast, and investigators knew they were on the right track. Back at Tina's home, Tina, Heather, and Brittany had returned, but they weren't done with their efforts to conceal the crime. What would they do next? Tina and Heather tried to hide the bloody clothes and shoes in a garbage bag, disposing of it later in a dumpster. As the police worked to piece together the details of the attack, they focused their attention on the people who had been closest to Audreanna. Tina Brown, Heather Lee, and Brittany Miller were all questioned about their involvement. Tina was the first to be interrogated. When she was brought in for questioning, she claimed to have no knowledge of what had happened to Audreanna. She insisted she had been at home watching movies that night with Heather. Tina explained that while there had been some arguments between her and Audreanna in the past, they had reconciled recently. "We weren't on bad terms," Tina said, downplaying the seriousness of their conflicts. She went on to explain that fighting was common in the trailer park where they lived, as neighbors often quarreled with one another. But why was she so insistent on explaining their bond and offering unnecessary details about how good friends she and Audreanna were? Could this defensive behavior be a sign of guilt? Well, Tina spoke in an almost defensive tone, repeating that she and Audreanna had been close friends and had patched up their differences. But the more she insisted, the more suspicious it seemed. When people tell the truth, they don't feel the need to go into unnecessary details about their friendship. It felt as though Tina was trying too hard to prove her innocence. As the investigation continued, a significant discovery was made. The hair weave Tina had been wearing during the interview was found to match a strand of hair discovered at the crime scene. This evidence placed Tina at the location of the attack, despite her denial. The hair had been pulled out during a violent struggle, which left the investigators with no doubt that she had been involved. Heather, Tina's neighbor and another person of interest, was interviewed separately. She also denied having anything to do with Audreanna's attack. Heather claimed she had been cooking fish at home that night and had no knowledge of what had transpired. She stated that Tina had visited her briefly, but then left to return to her own home. However, when Tina returned, Heather noticed her acting strangely, pointing toward the window and mentioning the arrival of the police. While Tina and Heather stuck to their stories, there was one key individual the police had not yet questioned: Brittany Miller. Brittany had been absent during the initial round of interrogations because she had gone to the hospital after injuring her hand. According to her, she had broken her pinky while beating Audreanna. This injury was significant. It wasn't just a minor break, but something that would have required considerable force. When Brittany was interviewed the next day, her demeanor raised alarms. She spoke in an unnervingly calm and detached manner, as if she were discussing a trip to the grocery store rather than a violent crime. She showed no remorse, no fear, and no anxiety. It was almost as though she had no connection to the brutal events that had unfolded. Despite the mounting evidence, all three women, Tina, Heather, and Brittany, were released after their initial interviews. But the police weren't giving up. They soon took Tina's vehicle for forensic analysis, and inside they found even more evidence linking the suspects to the crime. Drops of Audreanna's blood were found in the car, along with DNA on the crowbar, the stun gun, and the shoes. But was this enough to finally seal their fate? How much more evidence did they need to make an arrest? The police, though, had gathered enough to continue their investigation and were certain they would soon have all the pieces to the puzzle. The decision to release them, however, gave the officers an opportunity to observe their behavior, knowing that people sometimes make mistakes or reveal new details when they think they're out of danger. Then something crucial happened. Tina called a friend, Palomi, and told her about what had been done to Audreanna. She mentioned that, while Audreanna was still alive in the hospital, it was clear to Tina that their actions hadn't been enough to finish the job. Tina asked Palomi if she could finish what they had started. Why would she say this? Was she trying to ensure Audreanna didn't survive to testify? Palomi, realizing the gravity of the situation, contacted the authorities, providing them with a key lead. On April 9, 2010, 16 days after the incident, just as Audreanna succumbed to her injuries, the police had everything they needed to make arrests. Tina, Brittany, and Heather were taken into custody. The forensic evidence, including blood on Tina's car and the crowbar, confirmed their involvement in the horrific crime. The autopsy revealed the true extent of Audreanna's suffering. The cause of death was determined to be multiple thermal injuries, the result of being set on fire. There were also numerous blunt force injuries, and a severe laceration on her skull had caused internal bleeding. The only part of her body that wasn't affected was her right ankle and calf. These findings painted a tragic picture of the young woman's final moments. The investigation had uncovered a brutal crime, but the road to justice had only just begun. The pieces of the puzzle were finally falling into place, revealing the horrific events that had led to Audreanna Zimmerman's tragic death. Finally, in 2011, Heather made a deal with the authorities. She pleaded guilty to a second-degree felony and agreed to testify against Tina Brown and Brittany Miller to avoid a harsher punishment. During her interrogation, Heatherly broke down in tears, claiming she had always treated Audreanna well and was concerned for her well-being. She explained that their original intent was merely to teach Audreanna a lesson, but things spiraled out of control. Heatherly insisted she did not participate in the assault, describing herself as an unwilling witness who tried to intervene. As part of her confession, Heatherly was sentenced to 25 years in prison. And what about Tina, the woman who had allegedly orchestrated everything? Tina stuck to her version of events, claiming she had been watching movies all night and had no involvement. However, when her trial began in June 2012, the truth began to unravel. Witnesses, including Tina's own cellmate and another girl named Mallory, who was there during the attack, testified against her. Mallory revealed that she had been terrified to speak out, fearing she could face the same fate as Audreanna. She identified Tina as the most violent and aggressive attacker. Tina's defense lawyers attempted to argue that her troubled childhood had led to her actions, but a medical examination revealed no mental illness. The jury found Tina guilty of first-degree murder and recommended the death penalty, citing the brutal nature of the crime. She later apologized to Audreanna's family, but admitted to her role in the tragic death. As for Brittany Miller, she was under 18 at the time, so she couldn't face the death penalty. Instead, she was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of a review after 15 years. Now, what do you think drove the people closest to Audreanna Zimmerman to betray her in such a horrific way? Do you believe Tina's childhood struggles played a part in her actions, or was she simply cold and calculating? Let us know in the comments below, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more. On June 19, 2019, a 911 dispatcher received a call from a church employee reporting a tip about a body discovered in a remote location.
I work at the Rising Church in Old Town, Arvada. I have a person who's reporting a crime that was reported to him firsthand, and there's a vehicle that potentially has a body in it. The person who committed this crime is Frank Moffett.
In the background, a voice could be heard guiding the caller on what to say.
Okay, does he have any further information?
It's definitely not a hoax. It's not my number.
Police promptly responded to the call to investigate the report.
She said that there was a man in the church and that he wanted to report a crime. Essentially, the crime was that his brother had killed his girlfriend and placed her into the trunk of a vehicle near his home. As soon as we heard we possibly have a body in our car, we're thinking, we have a homicide. We need to treat this as a homicide.
The call included a serious allegation, naming a suspect who lived near the vehicle. Upon arriving at the provided address, police discovered a white Ford Escort. The vehicle was abandoned, had been unregistered for 2 years, and was filled with trash. When questioned by police, neighbors mentioned they believed the visible limbs inside the abandoned car were part of a mannequin.
Pretty sure. I mean, we both feel confident. And we pray that that's what we saw.
There was a distinct odor of rotting, of death. Every police officer knows the smell of death. There was a female body in the car. Her head was down near the floorboard. Her feet were almost up on the seat. My initial response is, we need to get our CSIs out. We need to get the lab out. We were concerned with the rising temperatures that we would start to lose physical evidence, DNA, off of the body.
The police needed to examine the body hidden beneath the piles of garbage bags.
Upon death, the body continues to change as it decays. So we ultimately sealed the car and then had it towed with the body in it back to the police station.
The pressing question was, how did the body end up in the car? Their only lead was the man named in the 911 call, Frank Moffett, who lived just around the corner from where the car was found. The police decided to move in on him.
Arvada PD! Make yourself known. Exit the residence with your hands up! Arvada PD! Arvada PD! Exit the residence!
Frank Moffett was promptly arrested and taken into custody for questioning.
Face the other way. Back up towards me until I tell you to stop.
He basically said that he had nothing to do with the homicide, had no idea how she ended up inside this vehicle that he was using at the time.
The police immediately began searching for evidence in and around Frank's house. They also canvassed the area, searching for any available surveillance footage.
We need to knock on every single door and get as much footage as we possibly could. Everybody has cameras these days.
There you go. Bingo. There, you got both angles. Okay, that's perfect.
Meanwhile, the crime scene investigation team began their meticulous work on the white car.
This was not just a female placed in the back of an empty vehicle. The car had a rolled up rug, it had trash bags, it had car batteries. It was packed full of stuff. Each item had to meticulously be taken out of the car. We processed some of the items for DNA. It was a very lengthy, slow process.
Detective Matt Archuleta carefully examined the evidence inside the car, as well as the body, to determine the cause of death.
There was a small trickle of like a bloody substance coming out of one of the eye sockets. And it had a downward shape to it in the sense that it had run down the nose and then dried. Following gravity, that would indicate the head was in an upright position when that drop came out. It was fairly obvious that the death had occurred somewhere else, that the body was put into the car by someone, and then that the body was covered with trash to hide the body.
After removing the body from the car, the police used a fingerprint scanner to identify the victim. The victim was identified as Veronica Sarinana. But what happened to her? Who could have possibly wanted her dead? And what clues were found that brought everything to light? Well, stay with us as we unravel the chilling events, the secrets, and the heartbreaking reality behind Veronica Sarinana's final days. On June 19, 2019, Veronica Ann Sarinana, a devoted mother, daughter, sister, and aunt, was taken from this world at just 38 years old. But who was she beyond this heartbreaking end? And what led to this heartbreaking loss? Veronica's family and friends remember her as a beautiful soul with a contagious smile and a laugh that filled the room. She was passionate about hiking, reading, and yoga, finding peace in nature and joy in simple moments. How could someone so full of life meet such a tragic fate? Born on August 30th, 1980, in Kremling, Colorado, Veronica was deeply loved by those around her. Her children, Emilio and Andrew Gutierrez, and her parents, Pedro and Sadie, mourn her absence every day. She also leaves behind siblings who remember her warmth and kindness, her sparkling eyes that lit up any space she entered. How does a family recover from losing someone so cherished? Despite the love that surrounded her, Veronica's life ended amid a conflict that brought unimaginable sorrow to all who knew her. Was this tragedy preventable? And how did the feud between two brothers lead to a loss that no family should have to endure? So, one of the two brothers, Christopher Moffat, was in a relationship with Veronica Sarinana, a bond that should have been safe and full of trust. But for Veronica, it was anything but safe. For 4 turbulent years, their relationship swung between brief moments of calm and terrifying bursts of violence. How could something that seemed like love become so twisted? Christopher viewed their relationship as a beautiful love story, but was it really? For Veronica, it was far from a storybook romance. The good times were always overshadowed by Chris's brutal outbursts, turning their lives into a nightmare cycle of control and fear. In January 2019, only 5 months before Veronica's tragic end, police were called in after one of Chris's violent attacks. He'd been arrested for assaulting her, but Veronica's story went beyond just one incident. She told investigators that he'd hurt her more than 100 times throughout their relationship. Can you imagine the pain and fear she lived with daily? The most horrifying part? Chris had a common method of hurting her. He would pin her down, cover her mouth and nose with his hand, and leave her unable to breathe. This wasn't just a moment of rage, it was a pattern of terrifying control. The first time he strangled her, she lost consciousness, and yet she found herself caught in a cycle, unable to break free. Despite the serious nature of the charges, something unexpected happened. In January, Chris was arrested, but by April, the assault charge was dismissed. Why was this charge dismissed? And what did this mean for Veronica? Without the weight of those charges, Chris walked free. But his anger hadn't faded. Just a day after his release, he assaulted her again. This time, he pled guilty to felony assault, receiving a sentence of 3 years probation. It was then that Veronica was granted a protection order, a fragile barrier between her and the man who continued to haunt her life. But even a protection order couldn't keep him away. Chris soon found himself back in jail, this time for a drug charge. But when he was released on June 12th, he reached out to Veronica again, ignoring the protection order entirely. He had nowhere else to go, and somehow Veronica, compassionate as she was, didn't turn him away. She chose to help him, despite everything, despite the warnings, and despite the protection order. What would make her do this? Veronica booked a series of hotel rooms for Chris around Denver, allowing him a place to stay even as her own safety was compromised. It's chilling to think about, isn't it? Here was a woman who, despite all that she'd endured, showed kindness to the man who'd caused her such fear and pain. But Veronica's generosity, sadly, came at a terrible cost. On June 17th, hotel security footage captured Veronica alive for one of the last times. She was seen paying for Chris's room while he passed by dressed in a white-collared shirt and a gray t-shirt that bore the unsettling words, "Serial Tillers," on the back. The very next day, June 18th, Veronica went to visit Chris again. This time, they planned a casual outing. They picked up Chinese food and a 6-pack of beer, hoping for a quiet picnic by scenic Lake Dillon. But this outing wasn't the lighthearted escape it seemed. Instead, a dark cloud was already looming over them, even if Veronica hadn't fully realized it yet. In Chris's mind, paranoia and jealousy were brewing. He had a suspicion, a devastating suspicion, that Veronica and his brother had been together while he was in jail. This idea hurt and angered him deeply, feeding his resentment. He wanted Veronica all to himself, with no one else in her life. And on that day, he tried to persuade her to leave it all behind, to run away with him and start fresh somewhere far away. But Veronica had already given him so many chances. She wasn't willing to throw everything away and run. And that refusal was enough to make Chris snap. His temper flared, and once again, he lost control. But this time, the consequences were irreversible. In a fit of rage, Chris strangled Veronica. By the time he came to his senses, it was too late. Veronica Sarinana, a loving mother and a kind-hearted woman, would never take another breath. The medical examiner later confirmed that she died from manual strangulation. Veronica was only 38 years old when she lost her life. She left behind 2 young sons, children who would now have to grow up without their mother. What would her sons remember of her? Would they remember the love she gave, or would the shadow of her tragic death haunt them forever? It's impossible to fully grasp the heartbreak and suffering Veronica must have endured, not just in her final moments, but throughout the years of her relationship with Chris. What drove her to keep helping him, despite the danger he posed? Why wasn't the justice system able to protect her, even with the protection order in place? Now Chris knew he was in deeper trouble than he had ever been in before. But instead of facing up to what he'd done, he began forming a desperate, almost reckless plan. And what did he come up with? Well, in his mind, he could escape the consequences if he could just convince the police that someone else was responsible. And the person he chose? His own brother, Frank Moffat, who went by Kelly. But why would Chris do this? Well, according to him, Kelly had bullied him for years, ever since they were kids. He painted a picture of constant fighting and bad blood. Chris later told detectives that Kelly had always been the bad guy in his life, often beating him up and picking on him. But what he didn't tell them was his true motive. He wanted revenge. This frame-up was his chance to finally get even, to settle some old scores with Kelly and punish him for what he felt was a recent betrayal involving Veronica. Chris then spun a story for the detectives, a story he hoped would make them believe Kelly was the real culprit. He claimed that on the night of June 18th, he'd dropped Veronica off at Kelly's place around midnight. He said he knew that she'd chosen to be with Kelly, and he claimed he was fine with it, even though it stung. According to his story, he reluctantly accepted her decision. But was that true? Nope. To make things even more convincing, text messages were sent from Veronica's phone to Kelly's that night. The police later hinted that Chris himself may have sent those texts to make it look like Veronica had plans with Kelly. Around 1:30 a.m. on June 19th, a security camera recorded Chris walking near Kelly's house. But here's the question. Why was he there, alone, in the middle of the night? And where was Veronica? Kelly lived in Arvada, a quiet suburb about 12 miles from Denver. In the early hours of that morning, Chris decided to return to Kelly's home. But why go back? What was he planning to do? This time, he was there to plant more evidence. Security footage shows Chris placing Veronica's purse on the dog gate right by Kelly's front door. Kelly and his housemates found the purse the next morning. Imagine their surprise. Veronica's purse was just sitting there, but they didn't know that something far more disturbing was close by. What they couldn't see was that Veronica's body was actually hidden in Kelly's old, beat-up car parked nearby, a car already loaded with trash. They had no idea this simple purse was part of a much larger setup. And what did Chris do next? To take his scheme a step further, he made an anonymous 911 call claiming there had been some suspicious activity and a possible disturbance at Kelly's house the night before. But he wasn't done yet. Just 20 minutes after that, another call came in to 911. This time it was from a church nearby, where an employee reported that a man matching Chris's description had walked in and started making shocking claims. He told them that his brother Kelly had killed his girlfriend and that her body was hidden in Kelly's car. The police took these calls seriously. They quickly descended on Kelly's house, determined to find this vehicle and the evidence inside. What did they find? A white Ford Escort parked not too far from Kelly's house, and in the back seat, hidden under garbage bags and a rolled-up carpet, they found Veronica's body. Now, why would Kelly have loaded this car with trash? Kelly later told police he had filled the car with garbage because he knew it was about to be towed. This detail alone added to the mystery. Could Chris have known this and used it to his advantage? Was it part of his calculated plan to pin everything on Kelly? Armed with the damning calls and the horrifying scene they just uncovered, police moved in to arrest Kelly. This wasn't a simple knock on the door. Given the severity of the accusations and the corpse in his car, they treated him as a dangerous suspect. First, officers used flashbang grenades to get his attention, making sure he knew they were serious. They then commanded him, loudly and forcefully, to come out of the house. Kelly was arrested, and for a while it seemed like Chris's story might hold up. But could he really get away with something this twisted? How long could his web of lies last? Well, while Chris's brother was getting questioned by the police for a murder he didn't commit, Chris himself was far from sitting still. Instead, he used this time to lay out more of his plan, making it look like his brother was the one responsible. But how exactly did he try to pull this off? And just how far was he willing to go to make it look like he was innocent? Chris got to work on building his alibi and creating a smokescreen to divert attention away from himself. He drove around to different places, libraries, public spots, even a casino, leaving messages for Veronica, who by then was already dead. What was he saying in these messages? He sent emails pretending to beg her to run away with him. Why? Because he wanted to give the impression that he thought she was still alive, as if she might just be off hiding somewhere. Adding another layer to his story, Chris didn't own a phone. This forced him to stop at various places to make calls, using different public phones to contact people, always from somewhere new. He even explained his movements to the police when they interviewed him, detailing where he'd been and what he'd done. But this was all just a performance to make himself look innocent. Then detectives uncovered a voicemail Chris had left for Veronica, another piece in his tangled web of deception. In this voicemail, he painted a picture that he still cared for her, as if he was genuinely concerned about her whereabouts. But with Veronica's death confirmed, these voicemails only deepened the mystery. Why go to all this trouble if he had nothing to hide? When asked why he was driving Veronica's car, Chris came up with another story, claiming that she felt guilty for supposedly betraying him by getting close to his brother. According to him, she wanted to make things right, so she handed her car over to him so he could leave town. But his story didn't add up. If he planned to leave on his own, why did he need her car? And if Veronica wasn't going with him, what was the point? Chris then told police he had agreed to pay Veronica $2,000 for the car. He said that when he had the money, he'd send it to her and she'd mail him the car's title. But this didn't quite make sense either. Why would someone who intended to stay close to someone they supposedly loved prepare to leave town with their car? Pressed to explain further, Chris claimed he'd last seen Veronica when he drove her to his brother's house late one night, dropping her off around midnight. After that, he said he drove out to the mouth of Black Rock Canyon, where he slept in the car. But what was he doing there alone? And why didn't Veronica go with him? Something didn't feel right. Then detectives hit him with the real news. Veronica was the victim of a murder investigation. Chris's reaction was to fake surprise. His story continued to unravel as detectives dug deeper into his whereabouts and actions. A massive hole in Chris's plan came to light through security footage that showed him around his brother Kelly's house on the night Veronica died. Chris had insisted he'd left Veronica at Kelly's house that evening, but the cameras showed otherwise. Kelly was inside his house all night and didn't leave, meaning he couldn't have been involved in any crime outside. Not only that, but Veronica was nowhere to be seen in the footage. The implication was clear. Chris's story didn't match up with reality. But why would he try so hard to frame his own brother? Kelly, now fully aware of Chris's intentions, told detectives that he believed Chris was trying to set him up. He suspected it was all because of Veronica and the complicated relationships between the three of them. Kelly even admitted to having been with Veronica once in April, adding another layer to the twisted triangle. But when he proved he had a solid alibi for the night in question, police were quick to clear him. This left Chris as the prime suspect. It wasn't exactly a leap given his history. There were multiple domestic violence charges on his record, all involving Veronica. He tried to present himself as trustworthy and honest with the detectives, but with so much stacking up against him, the detectives weren't buying it. On June 19th, the same day Veronica's body was discovered, police tracked Chris down in Glenwood Springs. He was sitting in Veronica's car, parked in a Walmart parking lot. This was a red flag in itself. Veronica was already missing, yet he had her vehicle. Police arrested him for violating a restraining order and booked him into the Garfield County Jail. Here, two detectives from the Arvada Police Department paid him a visit early the next morning, eager to ask him about the final hours he'd spent with Veronica. The topic of his brother Kelly came up repeatedly in their conversation. As the detectives questioned him, Chris repeatedly denied having anything to do with Veronica's death. But his explanations were flimsy at best. He even went so far as to label her as a stalker, claiming she had been obsessed with him. Why would he suddenly turn the story around like this? The truth is, Chris's stories had more holes than solid ground, and the detectives could see through them. Despite his insistence that he was innocent, everything, from the security footage to his inconsistent statements, pointed in one direction. It all came back to him, to the tangled mess he'd created to cover his tracks. As the detectives gathered more evidence, it became clear that this was not a case of a simple misunderstanding or a tragic accident. It was far more complex, layered with deception, manipulation, and betrayal. With each step Chris took to try to cover his tracks, he only made it easier for the truth to come to light. And in the end, his actions told the story louder than his words ever could. So was it worth it? Did Chris think he could actually get away with it? These are the questions that linger, casting a dark shadow over the tragic story of Veronica Sarinana's final days. Now, Chris Moffat, then 36, told investigators that the tension with his older brother Kelly wasn't new. It had been simmering for years, even decades. In fact, the hostility went back to their childhood, long before Veronica Sarinana, the woman Chris was eventually convicted of killing, entered the picture. This bad blood between the brothers set the stage for a tragic outcome. But how did it get to the point of murder? After Chris was arrested and in jail, something unexpected happened. His younger brother, Kenny, arranged a video visit. Imagine Chris's surprise. He hadn't even checked the visitor log and had no idea his little brother wanted to see him. Despite the bitterness he harbored toward Kelly, the tension with Kenny was clearly different. Chris seemed genuinely moved to see his younger sibling, thrilled by the effort Kenny made to reach out while he was behind bars. During their conversation, Chris didn't dive into the details of his case. He told Kenny he couldn't talk about it because it was still unresolved. Kenny seemed to understand, not pressing him for information. Instead, they focused on other things, including one of Chris's deepest concerns, his young daughter from a previous relationship. Chris begged Kenny to stay involved in her life, urging him to make sure she didn't lose her connection to the Moffat family. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, and Kenny reassured his brother, promising to do whatever he could to help. But what does this tell us about Chris's mindset? Was he already facing the reality that he might not be around to raise his daughter? The brothers began regular video calls, giving glimpses into Chris's life in jail. But what is life really like for someone facing such serious charges? For Chris, it was a daily reminder of the decisions he had made as he lived out his days in confinement, speaking with Kenny through a screen. Then, the day before Thanksgiving, Chris had another emotional interaction. His father joined in on a video call with him and Kenny. In a moment that pulled at the heartstrings, father and son reconnected, sharing a bittersweet holiday visit. For Chris, it was a chance to feel connected to his family, despite the charges hanging over him. But did this reunion bring any peace, or did it only deepen the sense of loss and regret? Chris's plan to frame his older brother Kelly was ultimately unsuccessful. Investigators found holes in his story, and the evidence didn't line up with his accusations. Security cameras contradicted his account, and lab results sealed his fate. DNA evidence found on Veronica's body, specifically on her hands and neck, matched Chris, not Kelly. Meanwhile, Kelly's DNA was nowhere to be found. The truth of what happened to Veronica started to come into focus, and Chris's attempt to deflect responsibility was exposed. But what was going through his mind as this evidence piled up against him? Did he believe he could actually get away with blaming his brother? The autopsy report further confirmed the tragedy of Veronica's final moments. It revealed that she had suffered extensive bruising and abrasions on her lips, eyes, throat, neck, and shoulders. The cause of death was determined to be manual strangulation, a brutal and personal act that left no doubt about the violence involved. For investigators, this reinforced the picture of a troubled relationship, marked by abuse and escalating hostility. In 2021, Chris finally admitted his guilt. He entered a plea deal, pleading guilty to second-degree murder and accepting the charges against him. This agreement allowed him to avoid a first-degree murder conviction and an additional charge of tampering with physical evidence. Yet it still led to a significant sentence. Jefferson County Judge Diego Hunt handed down a 40-year prison sentence for the murder, with an additional 15 years for tampering with a deceased human body. Chris also faced 8 years of parole once his sentence is completed. But was this justice served, or could there have been a different way forward? The story of Chris Moffat is a disturbing look into how unresolved family conflicts can spiral into tragedy. It's a case that raises so many questions. What could have been done to prevent this? How did the dynamics within the Moffat family set Chris on this path? And what are the lasting impacts on those left behind? Veronica Sarinana's memory serves as a grim reminder of the dangers of domestic violence and the lives it can claim. For her family and friends, justice may have been served, but it can never replace the loss they endured. Meanwhile, the Moffat family is left with fractured ties and painful memories. The case forces us to confront the darker aspects of human nature and the irreversible consequences of choices made in anger and resentment. Now, how do you feel about the justice served in this case? Let us know in the comments below, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more.
3 people are dead, including a 10-year-old boy, and state police are calling their deaths a homicide. Investigators say a relative found the bodies last night in a mobile home on Route 1 in the town of Amity, just south of Holton, and they still don't know who did it. As News 8's Keith Baldy reports, this certainly has shaken everyone.
Quite scared, to tell you the truth, and this is really, you know, for something like this to happen in a small town like this, you just can't believe it.
We all think we know what makes a small town safe: friendly neighbors, quiet streets, and a sense of trust. But what if that safety is just an illusion? In June 2010, Amity, Maine, a town where violent crimes were unheard of, was shaken by a tragedy that would change it forever. But what happened on that fateful day? Who was behind it, and why? Was it truly a random act, or was there more to the story? Well, stay with us till the end as we uncover the chilling events and their aftermath. This is the story of Thayne Ormsby. But before we get into Thayne Ormsby's case, There is something you need to know about Amity, Maine. This is not your bustling city or even a lively small town. Amity is a tiny, quiet community nestled on the U.S.-Canadian border in New England. With a population of just 253 as of 2020, calling it a town feels like a stretch. It's more like a hamlet. Imagine a place so remote that it has no restaurants, no hotels, and no attractions to speak of. In fact, its most notable landmarks are its two small cemeteries. Could such a peaceful and isolated place ever be the setting for something so dark and unimaginable? Now, Thayne Ormsby wasn't a native of Amity. He was a 20-year-old drifter who had been taken in by Robert Strout and his wife Joy, a kind-hearted couple trying to help him get back on his feet. But was Ormsby grateful? Did he appreciate their generosity? The answer, as you'll soon discover, is unsettling. Things started to unravel when Ormsby's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was charming, yes, but also manipulative, traits that allowed him to take and take until the Strouts finally had to say no. But why did this simple boundary trigger something so extreme? What made him cross a line that would forever change the lives of everyone involved? In June 2010, a brutal triple homicide rocked this small, unsuspecting community. Jeffrey Ryan, his 10-year-old son Jesse, and their family friend Jason DeHaan were found brutally murdered in Ryan's mobile home. This wasn't just a crime, it was a nightmare straight out of a Stephen King novel. How could such violence occur in a town where everyone knows each other? Now let's rewind a bit and take a closer look at the early life of Thayne Ormsby, a man whose early years seem full of contradictions. Born on May 22, 1992, to Maria Ormsby, Thayne grew up in a troubled environment. By many accounts, he seemed like an ordinary kid, even excelling in some areas. While his childhood has often been described as difficult, many who knew him also described him as a good guy, though what that really means is up for debate. Thayne's life was a complex mix of achievements, struggles, and missed opportunities, painting a picture of someone who might have taken a very different path under other circumstances. Thayne grew up in Ellsworth, Maine, a town about 2 hours and 40 minutes from Amity. During his time at Ellsworth High School, he was involved in both the wrestling and cross-country track teams, showing his physical strength and dedication to fitness. He was even an honor student, showcasing academic excellence. But despite these achievements, he didn't fit the mold of a typical success story. Isn't it strange how someone can seem to have everything going for them, yet still feel out of place? While he was recognized for his strength and determination in sports, his classmates described him as rough at times. Some noted his immense physical power, but nothing about his behavior stood out as particularly alarming. So what went wrong? Thayne's struggles can be traced back to his early years. According to reports, he suffered from physical and emotional neglect as a child. At the age of 12, he was removed from his mother's care, an event that seemed to mark a turning point in his life. Afterward, he lived with his uncle for a time, but the lack of consistent support and guidance left its mark. According to a psychiatrist, Thayne's early experiences likely shaped his later actions, and it's possible that intervention at an earlier stage might have changed his trajectory. Despite his early promise, Thayne never graduated high school. Instead, he began drifting through life, a young man with no clear direction. Despite the challenges, there were people in Thayne's life who tried to help. Interestingly, Thayne crossed paths with John Frary, a political candidate in Maine. Frary, who was running for Congress in 2008, took Thayne under his wing, providing him shelter and small amounts of money in exchange for campaign work. Frary saw potential in the young man and even encouraged him to consider joining the Marines. Could military discipline have given Thayne the structure he so desperately needed? We'll never know. Thayne rejected the idea, and their relationship soured over a trivial argument about a washing machine. After leaving Frary's care, Thayne moved in with a local reverend, another individual who tried to guide him. But once again, this arrangement didn't last. Despite the efforts of various people, a politician, a clergyman, and even family, Thayne seemed unreachable. Some people, no matter how much help they receive, remain on a troubled path. But why was Thayne's case so different? Was it his inner turmoil, or was there something else at play? By 2010, at just 20 years old, Thayne's journey brought him to Amity, Maine, a remote and quiet place far removed from his previous life. Here he lived with the Strout family, Robert and Joy, on their secluded property. In exchange for room and board, Thayne helped with cooking, cleaning, and tending to the family's birds. Perhaps he sought solace in the simplicity of rural life, or maybe he was simply running from his past. But did he find what he was looking for? Unfortunately, this chapter of his life would only deepen the shadows. 4 miles away from the Strout property lived Jeffrey Ryan, his 10-year-old son Jesse, and family friend Jason DeHaan. In this sparsely populated area, 4 miles was considered next door. The Ryan family's story intersected with Thayne's in ways that no one could have foreseen. But how did their paths cross, and why would their lives end in tragedy? Well, Jeffrey Ryan had once been married to Tamara Strout, the daughter of Robert and Joy Strout. The two shared a teenage daughter, Mariah, but their relationship had been far from amicable. After their divorce, tensions lingered. Jeffrey had also fathered Jesse with another woman, adding another layer of complexity to his life. These relationships created a web of connections and unresolved conflicts. Could these dynamics have played a role in the events that followed? Thayne's presence in Amity was quiet at first. He went about his duties with the Strout family, but something seemed to simmer beneath the surface. What was he seeking in this remote corner of Maine? Was it peace, redemption, or something darker? The answers remain elusive, but one thing is clear. The tranquility of this rural town would soon be shattered. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, Thayne's interactions with the Strout and Ryan families painted a picture of a young man caught between conflicting emotions. While he was described as likable and even charming, there were moments of tension and unease. But did anyone notice the warning signs? Or was the storm that was about to break completely unforeseen? And then in June 2010, everything went horribly wrong. It was in this remote and quiet part of Maine that the lives of Jeffrey Ryan, his son Jesse, and family friend Jason DeHaan would be tragically cut short. The details of what happened next are as chilling as they are tragic, leaving behind questions about whether Thayne Ormsby's early life could have foreshadowed such a horrifying outcome. Now it all began when Jake DeHaan, a concerned brother, set out to check on his sibling, Jason DeHaan. Jason hadn't returned home after a visit to his friend Jeffrey Ryan's trailer the day before. With no response to calls, Jake decided to head over to Jeff's place, located at 163 U.S. Route 1. The property appeared deserted. Jeff's Ford F-150 wasn't parked outside, and there was no sign of life. But Jake had no idea the scene he was about to uncover would change everything. So what was Jake expecting to find that day? Perhaps his brother sitting with their friend Jeffrey Ryan, laughing over a drink? Instead, as Jake knocked on the trailer door, he was greeted with silence. Growing uneasy, he grabbed a flashlight and peered through the windows. What he saw inside made him freeze. A scene so horrific it defied belief. Blood. It was everywhere. Yes, the trailer was smeared with blood, and panic set in. Jake quickly called his father, and together they forced their way inside the trailer, only to uncover a nightmare that would haunt them forever. Inside the trailer lay the lifeless body of 10-year-old Jesse Ryan, brutally stabbed to death. Jesse, who had come to Amity to spend Father's Day with his dad, Jeffrey, had seemingly tried to hide in the back room, but the attacker found him. The nightmare continued outside. A search of the property led to the discovery of Jeffrey Ryan's body in a woodshed and Jason DeHaan's body in a ditch. Jason had seemingly tried to escape but was overpowered. All three victims, Jeff, his son Jesse, and Jason, had been stabbed multiple times. Jason's throat had been slashed in a particularly brutal act of violence. What kind of person could carry out such an act? The investigation began immediately, with police noticing tire tracks leading away from the property. Jeffrey's 1989 Ford F-150 was missing, and authorities believed whoever had taken it was the killer. In a town of just over 200 people, could someone have seen or heard anything? The community, known for its quiet and trust, suddenly felt the weight of fear and suspicion. Jason DeHaan, one of the victims, left behind a wife, Crystal, and 3 young children. Jason and Jeffrey had been best friends, often sharing a drink and catching up. On the day of the tragedy, Jason had taken his ATV to visit his parents, but stopped by Jeff's place first. Heartbreakingly, Jason's 9-year-old daughter almost accompanied him that day, a routine she often enjoyed, but for reasons unknown, she stayed behind. It was later seen as a tragic blessing that she wasn't there. As police worked tirelessly to uncover the truth, they found a critical clue: fingerprints on a beer bottle inside the trailer. Whose fingerprints were they? The evidence led straight to Thayne Ormsby, a 20-year-old drifter who had recently arrived in Amity. But who was Thayne Ormsby, and why would he be connected to such a horrific crime? On June 29th, about a week after the murders, Thayne was apprehended and brought in for questioning. Ormsby was initially cooperative with police, calmly claiming he had no involvement in the murders. He admitted he'd been to Jeffrey Ryan's home before, even sharing a beer with him about 2 weeks earlier. He explained away the fingerprints as remnants from that visit. But could his story hold up? Well, the evidence told a different story. Police revealed they had found Ormsby's DNA at the crime scene, a discovery that left no room for doubt. It didn't take long for Thayne's confident facade to crumble. When police informed him that his DNA had been found at the crime scene, he knew the game was up. Thayne's resistance melted away, and he admitted to his involvement. Calmly, he asked the officers, "How detailed do you want me to be?" When the detective responded, "As much as you can," Thayne agreed to walk them through everything. He began his chilling confession with a calm resolve. "I'm already guilty. I might as well start from the beginning. What could have driven someone like Ormsby to commit such brutal acts?" As his confession unfolded, the chilling details painted a picture of calculated violence and a deep lack of remorse. Ormsby described in chilling detail how he arrived at Jeff's trailer with the intent to kill. His motives were unclear, perhaps jealousy, a desire to prove something, or a deep-seated anger. Whatever the reason, the result was the same: a senseless act of violence that claimed 3 lives. In the interrogation room, Thayne Ormsby calmly walked the police through the events of that tragic night. As he recounted the brutal murders, his demeanor was strikingly detached. There was no visible remorse or emotion, not even a hint of guilt as he described the horrific acts he had committed. He spoke matter-of-factly about the violence, showing little to no emotional response. Those who knew him previously painted a picture of a strong, athletic young man. He was a member of the cross-country and wrestling teams. One of his teammates even remarked, "He's freaking tough." However, that very toughness was used to carry out an unimaginable act of violence against 2 men and a young child. Ormsby's description of killing the 10-year-old boy, Jesse Ryan, was chilling in its lack of emotion. He explained how Jesse was the first to try to escape, running in fear. Ormsby simply said, "Jesse had been the quickest to go," offering no sign of remorse or sorrow. His matter-of-fact tone continued as he revealed how he chased Jesse down, stating that the child was scared, and that Jesse's fear made him an easy target. There was no reflection or empathy for the child's life being brutally taken. The lack of emotion and detachment in his words left many questioning why he would carry out such a violent act against 3 innocent people. The victims weren't even people Ormsby had known for long, so what could have possibly driven him to commit such a crime? When investigators asked Ormsby why he committed the murders, his answer was unsettling. Thayne claimed that he believed Jeffrey Ryan was a well-known local drug dealer involved in the sale of dangerous drugs, including heroin and marijuana. He described Ryan as evil, so evil, in fact, that Ormsby felt he needed to take action. Ormsby stated, "He's got to go. He's got to go," revealing that in his twisted mindset, he thought he was doing something good. He believed that by killing Jeffrey Ryan, he could rid the world of someone who was causing harm to others. Ormsby even went further, saying that he also wanted to kill Robert Strout because he believed Strout was another person who had hurt others. In his mind, this was justified. Thayne was convinced that something good would come from taking the lives of these men. His words reflected a warped sense of morality that seemed incomprehensible to those who were investigating the crime. Jeffrey Ryan, a disabled veteran with a back injury who was known for his quiet life, had no criminal background that would point to any involvement in serious offenses. While he did have a prescription for a narcotic painkiller due to his condition, there was never any evidence suggesting he was involved in drug trafficking. Both Jeffrey Ryan and his friend, Jason DeHaan, had minor past infractions. Jeffrey Ryan did have a minor run-in with the law back in 1992 when he was fined $100 for disorderly conduct. His friend Jason DeHaan had a DUI conviction in 2004, which cost him 7 days in jail, a $400 fine, and a year on probation. Neither of these men, however, were involved in anything remotely close to a life of crime, and certainly not to the extent of a drug-dealing network that could justify such an extreme act. Yet Thayne Ormsby, despite having no clear motive, claimed otherwise. No evidence was found to support Ormsby's claims about his alleged reasons for the murders, adding to the confusion and mystery surrounding the case. Thayne's own background did not paint the picture of a hardened criminal either. But what motivated him to commit such an unimaginable crime? The question still lingers, with no clear answer from Ormsby himself. Thayne Ormsby was arrested just 3 days after the murders, following a brutal and honest interrogation. One significant piece of evidence came in the form of Jeffrey Ryan's missing Ford F-150 truck, which was found burnt out in Weston, a 22-minute drive south of Amity. It was clear that whoever set the truck ablaze had made an attempt to destroy any evidence of their involvement. But who did this and why? As the investigation gained momentum and Ormsby became the prime suspect, a flood of tips and information came forward. Witnesses began to step forward with strange observations that added layers to the story. One such witness was the owner of a bar and grill in Dover, New Hampshire, about 4 hours away from Amity. By then, Thayne was preparing to leave town and had already begun handing out job applications, seeking a fresh start away from Amity. This raised questions. How did he get from Amity to Weston, and who had picked him up? The investigation revealed more questions than answers, leaving many pieces of the puzzle still missing. Ormsby was living with Robert Strout and his wife, Joy, at the time of the murders. This fact led the police to bring them in for questioning after they identified Ormsby as the main suspect. But why did Robert Strout wait until he was brought in by the authorities to speak up? Why did he not say anything sooner, especially when he knew more about the situation than he initially let on? According to Robert, on the day of the murders, he had been sitting on the porch enjoying a beer when he saw Jeff Ryan's truck pull into the driveway. He noticed the driver was not Jeff, but Thayne Ormsby. What Robert witnessed next would change everything. Thayne Ormsby stepped out of the truck, covered head to toe in blood. At that moment, Robert knew something was terribly wrong. But did Robert not find this alarming at the time? Or was there more to his reaction? Robert claimed that once Ormsby saw him witnessing the bloody scene, he threatened the entire Strout family, demanding their silence and help. Was Robert truly afraid, or did he feel a sense of loyalty to Thayne, who had lived with him for a time? Robert, under duress, followed Ormsby as he drove Jeff's truck to a remote area near Tamara Stout's home in Weston. What could have driven Ormsby to commit such a violent act, and how far would he go to cover up the crime? Robert stated that Ormsby stripped his clothes, cleaned himself, and burned the bloody garments. Robert then followed him as he drove the truck to a secluded field, where he doused it with gasoline and set it ablaze. What was going through Ormsby's mind as he carried out this final step? After the truck was destroyed, Robert and Thayne made their way back to Amity, where Thayne confidently declared, "It's done." However, Thayne was not finished. He still had the murder weapon, a knife. In a last attempt to dispose of it, he allegedly threw the knife into a marsh near the New Hampshire border. As he got rid of the weapon, he made an odd choice. He began distributing job applications in New Hampshire, as if trying to start over and leave his past behind. When Robert was questioned, he revealed that he had been a silent observer to events that seemed beyond belief. He had known more than he had let on before his arrest, leading some to wonder, was he an unwilling participant or a willing accomplice? His reaction to the police's accusations and the detailed accounts he provided pointed to a man who might have been coerced into helping Ormsby cover up the murders. Robert's story hinted at deeper motivations, including a personal grudge against Jeff Ryan. Robert had a strained relationship with Jeff, having once been married to Jeff's daughter. Did that animosity contribute to his reluctance to come forward, or did it play a role in the events that unfolded that night? Melanie, Jeff's daughter, recalled how Robert appeared on the news, speaking about how great Jeff had been and what a devoted father he was. But what Melanie found unsettling was that during this very interview, Robert already knew the truth. He knew who had killed Jeff, his son Jesse, and Jason. Why did he choose that moment to act as if he knew nothing about the murder, even as he spoke publicly about the victims' qualities and their loss? Was he trying to protect himself, or was there more to his involvement than met the eye? When the case of Thayne Ormsby hit the headlines, the entire town of Amity was stunned. How did a place known for its tranquility come to be at the center of such a disturbing event? Even now, years later, questions still linger. Was Ormsby acting alone, or did others have a part in the crimes? Jason DeHaan, Jason's brother, discovered the murder scene and has always believed that Thayne Ormsby did not act alone. During interviews, he mentioned that it seemed impossible for Thayne, a young, skinny man, to have overpowered his much larger and stronger brother. Jason's suspicion raised questions about whether someone else had assisted Thayne in carrying out the murders. The connections between Thayne, Robert Strout, and the Ryan family added weight to these theories. Could it be that Robert saw an opportunity to manipulate an impressionable young man, someone willing to do anything for money? Did he push Thayne into acting on his behalf to eliminate Jeff Ryan, someone Robert had long held a grudge against? The complex web of relationships and secrets pointed to more than just a single culprit, suggesting that the true story might be much deeper than it appeared. The investigation into this tragedy revealed many layers, from the brutal nature of the murders to the cover-up that followed. The questions surrounding Thayne Ormsby's motivations, the extent of Robert Strout's involvement, and whether Thayne truly acted alone have left a cloud of doubt and speculation. What was the real reason behind such violence, and who were the true masterminds behind the events that left the town of Amity forever changed? The answers remain elusive, sparking debate and curiosity even years after the crime. As time goes on, the impact of that day continues to ripple through the community and the families affected. The search for clarity and truth remains ongoing, but one thing is clear. In the depths of tragedy, even the smallest details can reveal the biggest truths. Well, in the end, Robert Strout, who was involved in this tragic case, ended up being sentenced to just 4 years in prison after striking a plea deal. In exchange for his testimony against Thayne Ormsby, Strout was given a reduced sentence, but the true extent of his involvement and his thoughts on the events remain a mystery. Robert passed away in December 2015, and details surrounding his death remain scarce, with no significant obituary available. His wife, Joy, passed away in 2013, and not much is known about her either. Another significant part of this case is the speculation surrounding Thayne Ormsby's motives. Some believe that Ormsby was involved in a relationship with Mariah, the 16-year-old daughter of Jeffrey Ryan and Tamara Stout. This relationship, which had been forbidden by Jeff Ryan, is thought to have sparked Ormsby's violent actions. On that day, Ryan's 10-year-old son Jesse was visiting for Father's Day, and family friend Jason DeHaan was also there, driving by and stopping in. No one could have predicted that these innocent lives would be caught in such a deadly situation. There are 3 main theories about why the triple homicide occurred. One is that Ormsby might have come to believe that Jeffrey Ryan was a drug dealer, possibly fueled by delusions or mental health issues. Another theory suggests that Ormsby, driven by an unexplainable urge, invented this drug dealer story as a reason to commit murder. The third theory is that Robert Strout played a part in influencing Ormsby, pushing him toward violence, suggesting he may not have acted alone. Ormsby was put on trial in 2012 and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. The jury didn't believe his defense, and he was found guilty on all counts, including 3 life sentences for murder and a conviction for arson for burning Jeff Ryan's truck. During his sentencing, Ormsby, dressed in a pinstripe suit, showed no remorse. He wiped tears away as his mother spoke of his difficult childhood, marked by neglect and abuse. Ormsby remained emotionless. Since then, he has tried to appeal his convictions 3 times, but all attempts failed. Now, Ormsby is likely to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Despite the conviction, the case leaves a lingering sense of unresolved questions. The violent act still feels more complex than just a 20-year-old drifter who suddenly decided to kill 3 people. Ormsby was a lost soul, roaming through Maine, and it's hard to imagine what pushed him to commit such brutality. Now, how do you feel about the way justice was served in this tragic story? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more.